I was reading an article the other day about an American lady named Jessie. I think she's a leader or of some sort in the evangelical church in America. And she chose to do something radical for Lent one year. She chose for the duration of this particular year's Lent, the whole 40 days and 40 nights, to wear a hijab. Jessie and her husband had moved to Jordan and had lived there for several years previously to that. And she admits in this article that I was reading that when she moved to Jordan, when she moved to the Middle East, that she was quite unprepared. She was unprepared in regards to understanding the culture and the language, let alone the religion. She admits to knowing nothing about Islam. But as the time went on, she ended up making some very close and lifelong friendships. Her husband, when she told her husband asked her the big question, why? Because her husband wanted her to have a good reason for doing something that was so radical, so out there. And this was Jessie's response. This is what she put in the article. I told my husband I would be putting on the practice of humility, hospitality, because I want to remember what it feels like to be an outsider. Because in Jordan, I definitely knew what that felt like. When you see a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl in the Middle East, I definitely stood out. I'm reminding myself what it feels like to be an outsider, so that I can love other people who are friends, strangers, and enemies. What it feels like to be an outsider. An interesting Lenten practice, isn't it, to take up, and I'm sure that for Jessie it bore great fruit in her life. Both the first reading and the Gospel in today's Mass place the outsider into the spotlight. Today, the outsider is the one who takes the front and center stage of events. If we look to the first reading, if we look to the prophet Isaiah speaking of the foreigner in that first reading, if you have a look at your newsletters, in bringing foreigners to the mountain of the Lord. This is a radical thought. Another word which the different versions of the Bible translate the word foreigner to is the word alien. That gives it a whole other different flavour again, doesn't it? When now to be an alien in that place seems more akin to having border control looming round the corner, doesn't it? Or perhaps a wall being built up to keep people outside or at arm's length. And of course, what Isaiah is saying here in that first reading is that these walls have been broken down, and so that an encounter with the living God can take place. The mountain, that's a place of encounter. That's why what he says is so radical. Is this encounter moment a turning point that Isaiah says that the Lord will make the foreigner joyful in my house of prayer. If we look to the gospel reading itself, which we've just heard, we are introduced to the character of the Canaanite woman, the Syrophoenician woman also known as, and to Jesus' encounter with that Canaanite woman. The Canaanite woman is herself an outsider. She is deemed as one of them, one of the Gentiles over there. She certainly isn't part of the home crowd, isn't part of the intimate circle. Yet she cries out, "Sir, Son of David, take pity on me." There's nothing worse than feeling like the outsider looking in. The sense of loneliness and powerlessness. And this powerlessness and loneliness can be something which totally erodes our own identities, totally erodes fundamentally who we are. Because let's be honest, the outsider doesn't belong. And for the outsider, all the outsider sees time and again is challenges are put in place to ensure that that outsider stays at that arm's length, over there, at that periphery pointer. These barriers become paralyzing, only ever making things worse. The sense of loneliness and despair and isolation gets worse and worse. Think about someone who moves to a foreign country, not being able neither to speak the language or understand the culture, perhaps, as an example of this. We get a little flavour of that in that little quote from the article from that lady Jessie, don't we, a little moment ago. But you don't have to be on foreign soil to be an outsider. Because the sad reality is that being an outsider can also take different forms. To be an outsider can also take shape within friendship circles, can take place within institutions, dare I say, within clubs perhaps. In contemporary society, to live a life in conformity with the message of the gospel, to follow in those footsteps of Jesus himself, leads many of us to feel like outsiders as we look into the contemporary world, look to the popular media as examples. What I found interesting about what Jessie says in that little bit of the article I read was that she described her Lenten journey as putting on the practice of hospitality. Saint Benedict, who I'm sure you know now is one of my great patron saints, speaks of hospitality quite a lot. It's quite a big focus in the rule of Saint Benedict. And he speaks of hospitality as well as welcoming everyone as if they were Christ. Our readings this weekend help us to recognize that not even being the outsider was in the end enough to be a barrier to encountering the person of Jesus, of being able to seek and cry out for that healing moment which just begins to remove those barriers which in the past have kept the outsiders at the peripheries. The Canaanite woman in the gospel is identified by Jesus not as the outsider, not as one of them, but rather as a woman of faith. Going on a bit further, the Canaanite woman of the gospel shows great perseverance in her continual approach to Jesus time and time again. This is a powerful insight to the gospel. We may associate with the outsider in different ways. We may associate with the outsider in a very personal way, if perhaps we ourselves are in that outsider perspective ourselves, looking inwards to situations, or whether perhaps we ourselves are looking to those periphery places where we ourselves see the outsiders taking refuge. Perhaps a bit of both. Let us cry out to the Lord ourselves, "Sir, Son of David, take pity on me." Trusting that the Lord will turn to us, will hear our cry, and will be able to extend that hand of consolation and be able to say to us, "You have great faith, let your wish be granted." Amen.